All right, this is the Technological Future of War panel. I'm your moderator, which is a frightening concept. We'll let everybody introduce themselves and we'll get started. Uh, who's first?
How about you, JF?
I'll go first. Um, my name is John Holmes, but I write under J.F. Holmes because there's another famous John Holmes out there. Please do not Google that. You'll be surprised at what you find. So I write under the pen name of J.F. Holmes, and I write military science fiction, fantasy, space opera, whatever it is that comes to mind. Um, I, my latest two books are The Irish Brigade, which is homage to David Drake's Hammer Snipers, and The Fey Wars, which is a mix of military and fantasy. Retired Army and getting a little fatter as we speak.
And he has a story in Freehold Defiance, which just
Yes.
came out and hit two bestseller tags at the same time, number one and number five.
Awesome.
And who's next?
I suppose I can go. I'm Brad R. Torgerson. I've got a story in Mike's Freehold Resistance, Antho, which came out about 18 months ago. I also publish in Analog Magazine and a number of different anthologies. My military hard science fiction novel, A Star-Wheeled Sky, won the Dragon Award at the 2019 Dragon Awards at DragonCon Atlanta. And I'm also Army, but I'm Army Reserve, been deployed a few times, Chief Warrant Officer. And yes, I love talking about hard science fiction and military science fiction.
I'm Michael Williamson. I write hard science fiction, occasional fantasy, uh, contemporary military fiction. I'm editor at large for a survival blog where I do product reviews, look at various disaster scenarios, none of which we expected to be exactly the way they've played out, but we made up as we went along. This is the technological future of war. So, what's the first thing we're looking at for future warfare? Somebody pick something and we'll run with it.
AI.
AI. So the AI is going to wipe us out. We're going to wipe the AI out, or we're going to have the AIs fight on our behalf.
All of the above.
Yeah, all the above. And I'm not sure what order it's going to happen.
Yeah.
If you follow the U.S. Army developments and Chinese and Russian efforts, especially with drone fighters and things like that, it's increasingly being taken out of the hands of the people fighting. How long it takes to reach that singularity where Skynet wakes up and just decides we're not worth it. It's much more a possibility than when I watched the Terminator, so it's kind of scary.
Yeah, because people they've seen Tron and they've seen the Matrix and they've seen the Terminator, but they keep trying to do it. I mean, haven't you seen the documentaries here? I mean, we know what happens. So why do you keep poking that button?
It's all about the competitive edge and getting there first, though, as well.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
but
what's driving it. Is somebody will be the first to have a practical tactical AI that can run like ROVs and things.
and then they'll be the
I,
last.
Yeah,
I
well,
mean,
it's
it could be. So, I mean, do you
it's
want to be
it,
second place in that race? I
it
guess
comes
that's the
down to:
question.
do you want Skynet speaking Chinese or American?
I don't want Skynet.
Oh,
I
as
want
much
to
as
Yeah.
take Skynet out before that happens.
as much
I'll
as
go
we
ahead.
may not want it, it's going to happen eventually.
I'll go
I
ahead and
was
introduce yourself. Not to your here.
What's that?
Go ahead and introduce yourself. Not to your here.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was here earlier. I am Cal Spriggs. I am a writer of military science fiction, epic fantasy, urban fantasy, variety of genres. I'm a U.S. Army combat veteran. Was a reservist and was active duty, and am now an active reservist. So I have completed the trifecta. And yeah, I plan military exercises and mostly try and avoid doing too much.
So we actually had a story relevant to this in Freehold Resistance, and several stories weave through the whole compilation. But my wife's IT forensics, and she had the story of what happens inevitably when someone hacks your drones and you start getting blue on blue kills. and that is the last time anyone in that war will use drones. I mean, inevitably, there's going to be either AIs or sufficient remote footprint to make this an inevitability. And then what's going to happen is someone is going to hack, because the enemy always gets a vote. And immediately your tech level takes a substantial hit, because you can't trust your own equipment. Unless it's not enough to have C3 supremacy, you have to have utter control from design, fabrication, implementation, deployment, and never have any leaks, which is impossible.
It kind of reminds me of the sci-fi novel from, I want to say it was the 60s, but they'd gotten so advanced in warfare that they then retrogressed because you couldn't risk having smart tech of any kind. So they had bolt action rifles, and they had basically Kevlar armor, and that was it. And they avoided anything ultra tech because it was massively expensive, and ultimately it failed them whenever they needed it.
Yeah, there were several of those. And then, of course, Joe Haldeman had the Forever War, where you never knew the tech level of who you were going to be fighting. I mean, because of time dilation effects, technology kept progressing, but you might be fighting someone who could damp your energy weapons and reduce you back to melee combat, or projectiles, or vice versa.
Of course, there's always the Battlestar Galactica effect, where your servants turn on you and eventually become so much you can't tell the difference between them and humans. I think there was a Highland story a long time ago about eventually the robots look so human-like that they accidentally let them slip into their last base in the war. But it's a standard science fiction thing, the AI. So how have you guys as authors treated AI in your stories?
Well, as I said, the way we treated it was eventually someone hacks it, and everybody stops giving the equipment that level of control or access. It's simply not safe to do so. I mean, you use the footprint while you've got it, but at any point, your technological superweapon could become either obsolete or repurposed, regardless.
I've seen two takes on it that I have basically adopted for my own, which is the one, you either have it prohibited because there's been awful things, and that's Dune and the Warhammer 40K universe, and it's been done quite a bit. But the other take, which I like utilizing, is humanizing them. So these things grow progressively more advanced and more intelligent and self-aware, and you give them humanizing traits. It was done in the Schlock Mercenary universe. It was done in a variety of other universes, where you have the Bolo universe is a good example, where you have these instruments of war that take on humanizing traits and become self-aware, and ultimately either decide that they want to do off with humanity or coexist.
Or we can also assume that AI, as we all imagine it or have imagined it for the past 50 years, it might not ever be achievable. We might get technology that's good at figuring out simple problems very, very quickly, but a sufficiently independent AI that could be packed into something, say, the size of a car or a tank or even a man-sized robot might not ever be achievable. I mean, that is an assumption you could make in your universe. That's the thing about this, right? It's so open-ended. We might end up with HAL 9000, but we might not ever get much beyond a supersized Roomba. I mean, it's hard to say how it's going to end up. I did a story for a Bane anthology that's going to go to print, I think, later this year, where I picked up on an analog story where my whole idea on that was I was thinking not so much along the lines of AI independent robots on the fighting field as much as proxies. I called them proxies in the stories, where you have basically a man-shaped, man-sized robot that goes places that people can't go. We're already using these, like EOD technicians. Mike Kapari, Bane author, he actually had to carry that robot in Afghanistan. I kind of wish he was on here to talk about that, because he has real world experience with actual robots in combat, or at least in a combat scenario. But I've thought proxies, if we can have human controllers running these things. My environment for this was space combat. So you have these things in orbit, and they can stay in orbit for a long time. They don't need oxygen. They don't need food. They can charge from the local power source. There might be very practical reasons to have remotely operated vehicles of that type in environments where we don't want them. Undersea warfare, that might be another place where robots would be extremely valuable, but you would always need that critical human control. Now, as we talked earlier, people are either going to hack that or they're going to block it, right? You're going to get your electronic warfare specialists to get in there, and they're going to find a way to block the signal. Just about, I would say, for the people watching this, just about any technology you come up with for your story, you have to assume somebody is going to quickly find a way to either hack it or interfere with it, and that's
Yes,
going to really
ongoing struggle. The arms race between defense, offense, and counter.
And sometimes the counter is not necessarily high tech. It could be low tech. The smearing mud on Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Predator, very low tech, possibly not feasible, but amusing in the fact that it was a low tech.
Yeah. One of the things that and of course an AI can always say, "So what's in this for me? I want money."
Yeah.
Or computerized women or whatever, but
computerized women.
Slightly
entertainment sims.
Yes, slightly lower tech that constantly comes up, especially in the Air Force, is we'll just make everything remotely piloted, and then we're not risking our pilots, and we can have them somewhere else. Okay, so then you're running to, first of all, speed of light lag. We'll just put them all on the AWACS plane. And I responded with, so I've only got to hit one aircraft?
Primary target, yeah.
You've just made that one aircraft the only thing I have to hit. I can
critical node.
Yeah.
Or not even hit it, just subvert the pilot, tell them crash the plane or we'll kill your family. Very low tech solution.
Yes. And the other issue there is that reconfigures the entire battle space around protecting that aircraft. That's now the primary defensive function, is protecting that aircraft. You can lose anything else, but if you lose that, you've lost your offense and your defense.
Carrier too. That's a Navy problem too. Mm-hmm. How many ships do we have out there to protect the carrier? That's their job. One of the newer things that we're in an arms race now is speed of weapons delivery on a battlefield. The Army just announced a hypersonic weapon. China's been working on it. Russia has two. The Navy stepped on their wanker with their railgun technology for the zoom waltz. Mm-hmm. But that's something we're going to see much, I think. You guys can all tell me your opinion on it. We're going to see a lot more of that international, intercontinental hyperspeed weaponry.
Mm-hmm.
The reasons for
play there is just like the finance industry is buying buildings just to have their computers a microsecond closer to the operation center.
Yeah, make a trade.
Yeah.
Minimize
all that's going to come into play.
You can see
how fast is your processing speed, your deployment speed.
Contractual services as well. Amazon Web Services is a huge industry. All that processing power. If you want to hack the Pentagon or the Kremlin or wherever, who has the contracts with Amazon? Who's going to utilize them?
That's true. Yeah.
Have one side hire Amazon and the other side hire Microsoft, and then regardless of what happens, everybody wins.
Yeah.
We had a real world case of this back in 2015. So in the reserve, there's a support software called RLAS, RLAS. Cal's familiar with that. So what actually, my understanding is, and I wasn't there to see the nitty gritty, but I did a little bit of research after the fact. So RLAS went down in like mid-February, and it didn't come back up again for, I think, at least 60 to 90 days. And the reason why is because the contractor who supported it had a dispute with, the DOD, and said, okay, fine, fuck you guys. I'm going to just turn it off, and you go have fun and think about it and see if you want to come back and pay me what I think I should be paid. And they literally said bye-bye and switched it off. And RLAS was dead for the whole reserve for, I think it was, I want to say, about 60 days at least. And that was a colossal problem because suddenly orders couldn't be generated, orders couldn't be paid. That was how my unit was getting impacted. So for those of you out in TV land watching this, when soldiers don't get paid, you have a lot of pissed off soldiers. And
yeah, it's kind of critical. Yeah.
So this wasn't a battle space software, but it was fairly critical to mission ops, and you had a lot of pissed off soldiers not getting paid. I mean, these are things that I would plant as story seeds or complicating seeds for anybody doing a story. There are all kinds of ways that when you have your military dependent on software, that things can go wrong. Contractors
There
can
was
skip
a
out.
British submarine that got a blue screen of death
Oh,
a couple of years ago on their operating system. They had to surface. Yeah. Then their Microsoft-based operation system crashed hard. They had to surface and get support.
The story I like
really
about the
war.
Brits is the British sub and the French sub that collided underwater and didn't know it for 4 months later until they were communicating and said, "Oh, that was you guys. We just thought it was an underwater object."
really? When did that happen?
That was 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It was relatively recently.
Wow.
Oops.
Stepping back to low tech there,
Sorry.
as Brad brought up, I remember watching a OCS instructor sit there talking about PT and how the men underneath you will not respect you if you can't do more PT than they can. And here I am, a career NCO, going, so as long as I'm getting paid, have orders that make sense, whether I like them or not, I'm fed and have a place to sleep at some point, I'm pretty good. My family's taken care of. I'm taken care of. I'm doing something that I understand is relevant. The PT is kind of secondary to all that, sir. I really got to say, and that's where it's not directly related to battle footprint, but the more technology you have for taking care of things like that, keeping it was actually when I was deployed, because Vietnam, they had letters home and occasional phone calls, and we had regular phone calls and the internet, and it actually made some issues worse because there was instant communication. It wasn't a case of, oh man, that she had to replace the car and that's expensive, and no, what happened right now? No, I've got to take a break. The technology can actually be a hindrance to the operations.
No, that's true.
But at the same time, you have to take care of the people.
Well, I'd go a step further. I think Shadow UAVs, UAS, is a horrible ability to enable a general to look down and try and control individual soldiers like this is some horrible RTS. And he needs to move left. He needs to move 100 meters to his left. Get to his platoon leader on the line. I've seen that kind of shit in exercises, and when a 2-star general can look down and see, squad B
and move his
Private
pieces on the
Snuffy.
board so he can win the game.
Yeah. And
Well,
feel godlike power. He can look down upon everyone. It's
at the same time, if he sees something critical and doesn't act, he is then liable for disciplinary action for, not taking care of his people or taking care of the battle or whatever. It's a two-edged sword.
Yeah. Well, they complained about that
too
in
much
Vietnam too.
information. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that you bring up generals. That's a great point. Maybe that's where AI finds its true niche, is not necessarily tactical, but strategic. I mean, that was the thing
How we
about
play a game.
right. Exactly. That's exactly right. The Whopper. Because the Whopper can war game everything out in advance and can theoretically think far ahead of any human mind.
So, I play with this army game called Warsim. It is like the world's worst strategy game ever. No, we do not want them in charge.
Yeah, Brad, what you just described is Skynet.
That's
you
awful.
literally just described Skynet.
Hey, it's possible. We were talking earlier that maybe Skynet's inevitable. Maybe it is.
Quick description of something I've seen. The terrain might not necessarily match up to what the computer views as terrain. And I've seen an entire tank battalion, armor battalion, wiped out because the ridge line was in front of it in the game, but on the map it was over the ridgeline, so it stood there and shot at the ridgeline while a flanking armored battalion killed it. So,
Or it could drive into the water.
yeah, user
awesome.
error is a thing, but also
That's
computers are dumb.
So what we need is for us to develop Skynet and the Chinese to develop the Matrix, and we'll have them fight each other.
That'd be cool.
They
I
can
think-
other-
Wasn't that the Sock'em Rock'em Robots movie?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we need to think about too is the human element. You know, right now, if you're looking at America, something like only 30% of the eligible population passes the criteria to actually join the military. So even if we had a draft, we'd be hurting for people because they're all a bunch of fat, lazy, video game playing, Cheeto eating. You know what I mean? That's
And
going to be part of
criteria for a
future
draft
warfare.
Or a year. It's a year before they can have troops.
Yeah.
Field. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a hard time basically filling that human element, you know? And then if we keep to those physical standards, how do you recruit the hacker who, you know, lives on Red Bull and weighs 20 pounds and is 7 foot tall, but he's a genius? You know, how do you do that?
The Brits are running ads for all the people with social disorders of various kinds for their unique skill sets.
Is that the snowflake ad?
Yeah, the snowflake ads.
Okay,
Yep.
I saw that. Yeah.
Well,
They got a bunch of
the
them.
Army is doing direct commission stuff now. I hear to very mixed results, but their goal is to basically do the same thing with the cyber realm as with docs and chaplains and et cetera. They direct commission them in, and in some cases give them very high ranks. They're running into a lot of problems with mental stability, and can this guy pass a basic security clearance check when he was hacking ATMs when he was 15? You know,
That and the physical fitness too, for some silly reason.
Well, they're waiving a lot of that. So same way as they waive it for certain docs and chaplains and stuff. They're talking about waiving waivers for any kind of physical fitness stuff.
And when I had this in Freehold, people said I was nuts and it would never happen.
Well,
And here it is.
If you told us where we'd be 10 years ago doing a virtual call instead of meeting in person, I would have said you were nuts too. But
Oh no, this
Well,
is
the Army is now doing whole
Consensus.
schools virtual. I just finished my
yeah,
intermediate level officer education virtual. Yeah, and no PT test, obviously. We're riding on our old scores. I rode on my old score from 2 years ago at Camp Arif John in Kuwait, and might do it again this summer if they can let me finish the rest of ILE. Yeah, it is amazing what, you know, it takes me back to that old adage, you fight with the army you have, not the army you want. And I suspect it will be true of any AI and or mechanical proxies or whatever we introduce on a mass level.
There was report out of China that half of their troops were addicted to video games and porn and were not fit for combat.
good.
That sounds like our guys. I'm
So
sorry.
they
Did I say that out loud?
they can't even crew their entire Navy right now because guys don't want to be out at sea where they don't have internet access for games and porn.
Going back to, I think it was Brad saying that he completed his ILE online. Do you think that training, the future of that, replaces actual hands-on stuff? Because if you look at 7th Fleet, I think it is, some of the problems they've had is they don't teach basic seamanship anymore. So you're having ships crashing into each other, like the
Collisions, yeah.
surface warfare officers just supposed to complete CD training and
They
online
wanted a
training.
diverse crew. They had a diverse crew though.
Well, yeah, that's true. Which the ocean doesn't really give a crap about.
They had
Oh, yeah.
a couple officers on the bridge who hated each other and refused to talk to each other, which led to collision.
Yeah.
I heard from a field grade officer that he's got, or at least had under his command, 2 people in the process of a divorce who had a no contact order.
In his
Shit.
command.
Seriously?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
So-
We've got 2 officers in my unit right now who I wish were on a no contact order. I
Yeah,
wish.
he had 2 of his ranking people could not legally talk to each other.
Nice. So getting back to the future warfare thing, do you think that virtual training is going to eventually be a full substitute for just the hands-on crap stuff that we
So-
all went through.
I think the Army, yeah, I think the military in general will adopt it because it's a cost-saving measure. But I mean, the Army as a whole adopted. You're going to do DL ILE a while back, and then reservists had basically had it crammed down their throats. But what they said is it's all equal, but we also have these guys going in person, and these guys are not better than anyone, but some animals are more equal than others, kind of
Well, they get
situation.
to network. They're networking.
They knew everyone. They were selected. So, yeah.
And if you actually get to meet people, you learn how they actually react.
Interact. Yeah.
Versus,
That people skill.
There's some stuff you can do remote, and the military, the Army specifically, sometimes has an obsession with making it as uncomfortable and unpleasant and inconvenient as possible. If you're trying to teach somebody, the way we always did this for the Air Force is first you get crammed full of the book knowledge, and then you do the week-long exercise where you don't sleep after you've learned the subject matter. Yeah, doing it the other way is really less efficient. So,
well, somebody pointed, who was it? Now that I got to remember the name, it escapes me. But somebody pointed out to me recently that as much as we talk about China as being a near-peer threat, China has not fought a land war in decades. They've not fought a sea war really ever. There's all kinds of Oh, go ahead.
I was going to object to that. They've been fighting skirmishes with India and winning. Basically, every 6 months they move the border with India, a couple hundred yards. Granted, that's not guns; that's beating each other with clubs and then redrawing the border. But
I'm going to point out China is winning the Cold War with the U.S.
Yeah,
absolutely.
They looked at the Soviets, who spent 25% of their GDP on their military versus our 5%, and strangled doing it. And look at what they just did. There is a new virus out of China every year. Okay, this one had a little higher mortality than others, but it is not the Black Death of 1346. It's a overhyped cold, and it kills people who are largely quite elderly, which is tragic, but is not strategically damaging the way, say, the Spanish flu was when it took out people in their 20s and 30s. First, they played the pity card, and Spain, I think, gave them a whole bunch of masks. And then when other people needed masks, China sold the masks at a profit, and at a infinite profit because they didn't pay for them. The Chinese were over here. Our governor, who was over at some shindig there before all this started, luckily he got shouted down. I was talking about these delightful Chinese companies that were willing to buy out our struggling local businesses, to make them profitable again. Like this is a Cold War.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're taking over the economy.
It's not a Cold War; it's an economic war. Yeah.
Well, it's a cultural war too.
Well,
so how does AI play into that then? How does AI affect? So we're not shooting at each other, but
if you talk to the finance industry guys, it's all AI. It's I can trade yuan over there for 15 billionths of a cent more than over here, and I have an AI that can calculate that and execute all those trades before anyone else notices. So that the finance guys,
about 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, it's also
in the silver market. I watched silver go from $15 to $14 and back up to $14.96 in the space of under a minute. Someone dumped 1 billion ounces on the market, bought 1 billion ounces and pocketed the difference. And then this last week, there's been 2 massive drops and spikes in the cryptocurrency market. We're talking.
The Chinese just announced 30%. Don't trust it. Yeah. And then suddenly it drops.
Mm-hmm.
50 down to below 50,000.
We're also in a cultural Cold War.
Okay.
I was going to say, when you addict half of America's youth to TikTok, and then you can control the algorithms and what they're being shown, then guess what? You're winning that Cold War too. I live with somebody who watches. Yeah, they watch TikTok all day long, and go for it, Mike.
No, go ahead. Finish. that
I was going
it?
to say, when I grew up, the Russians were the bad guys, and we knew that they were the bad guys, right? And, shot at Russian soldier targets, and everybody was worried that we were going to get nuked by them. But I see the up and coming generation are like, oh, well, it's just China. They're cool. They put out a lot of cool high tech stuff. And they're winning the hearts and minds war, either through twisting countries' arms by massive debt or by providing distraction all the time, so that people only want to get their TikTok, so to speak. Well, and also collecting tons of information on it too. So.
Yep. Gab, placing itself as a platform competing with Twitter primarily and with Facebook, is massively infiltrated by, controlled by Chinese bots, and requires a bunch of personal information from you, which they are then harvesting for, advertising purposes at the very least. And something I referenced in fiction, which people seem to have missed, while it's illegal for the U.S. to spy on you, the U.S. government to spy on you for certain information, they can't stop a foreign government from spying on you, but they can buy that information.
Yeah, then collect it.
Yeah. They haven't broken any U.S. laws by doing that.
Well, maybe that's the seed for a potential story. No shots fired. All of the quotes combat is conducted through the internet, and you have smart IAs capable of manipulating the social space, as was pointed out. John pointed that out. We're getting the all the teenagers addicted to a social space. It's a bit like Ender's Game, right? In the plot of Ender's Game, that's a big part of it. Is the hegemony, originates online in social media.
There's a classic Trek episode where the two planets are fighting and they detonate fission bombs in the computer, and the computer just tells people to walk over to the disintegration chamber because they're a casualty, and they do it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
And then I don't know if you guys
at the time, but I'm not so sure.
Well, you guys watched the Orville? They had an episode where people were judged for their crimes by how many likes or not likes they got. So
the Roman.
So that's what we have now.
Yeah, pretty much.
So that's Twitter.
Yeah, but there's a lot of different things to think about when you talk about future warfare. I mean, the also thing to look at is how vulnerable our infrastructure and our civilization is to cyber warfare. I mean, if you pull the plug in the United States for a week, we're toast. And the same for China, I'm sure. But what was it? Einstein said World War IV will be fought with rocks and sticks or something. That's the risk of future warfare. Is it going to wreck everything?
I don't think it would wreck everything. I could see a country or a section of a country or a Commonwealth area like parts of Europe taking a massive hit, but something that would take everything down looks to be a much more complicated issue.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah,
but
any damage you can do to your enemy.
Well, you can kind of go over to John Ringo's Black Tide Rising and almost talk about 3D printing a virus if you want to get technological and go into the wetware. How about nano assembling viruses that you can then deploy on the fly, so to speak? That's kind of the other end of the spectrum. You want to take it all down, do something like that, and then take out the power grid so they have no capability to develop a means to fight you.
Ooh, wetware is a good one because Werner Vinci. That's one of the key plot points in his follow-up to Fire Upon the Deep. So in A Deepness in the Sky, that's exactly what they do. They basically have a nano level machine virus that can actually afflict people, and that's how one side basically beats the other in a planetary engagement. And it's really horrifying how they do it too, because they end up with basically the defeated people end up as slaves because they're now infested with this nano level virus. They call it POCUS, where basically they take the losers, and everybody that's talented at any kind of specific thing, suddenly that person becomes like a deliberate Asperger's sufferer, where that's all they do. And they do it so well that they neglect their health. They neglect everything around them. They just do that one specific task, almost like a
program.
robot. It's really well written and it's really horrifying. So yeah, that's Werner Vinge. It's good reading, but it's disturbing reading.
Yeah, there's another book series I remember reading where it basically subverted them. It didn't hurt them, didn't kill them. It just changed their minds about what they thought. So sort of like J.F. Holmes was saying with the social influencing, only this literally goes in there and removes your free will and changes your opinion. So that's pretty horrifying, I think, too.
I would say that's probably the most horrifying thought if we think about AI and warfare. Something that could literally infect humans and mind control them. I mean, that's a truly disturbing idea. Really gross.
Except they've, if you look at the last year, they've managed to do that to a large section of the population just with regular media.
Hysteria.
It's unsafe to leave your house. If you leave your house, you will fall over dead from the COVIDs.
It just means you're not compassionate,
done
Mike. If you were compassionate, you would wear 3 masks and an oxygen tank, and you just hate poor people, Mike. That's all it is.
I had a discussion with someone where they said, do you want people to die? And I said, boy, this is going to be an awkward conversation. I mean, it's not awkward for me, but obviously it's going to be awkward for you. So kind of shut them up. But no, any kind of, this was a very relatively minor virus. I mean, it's a significantly bad cold, but it's minor compared to any number of plagues we've had. Bring out something a little more substantive and then start throwing the media at it and all the 50,000 Chinese bots on Twitter going, be like China. And you could readily take a country down. And then any kind of cyber attack on their, a pipeline maybe. And if these things had actually been organized rather than simply stacking one on top of each other, they could have been a much bigger disaster.
Yeah. We're still seeing the economic impacts. I mean, there's anyone who's tried to build a computer in the past 6 months is probably extremely unhappy at the inability to get those prices of cars skyrocketing, some other stuff. And this is just the 12-month out shortages of basic inputs to the economy.
So that touches back to what I was saying about how, if you interrupt the supply chain, I mean, Hurricane Sandy kind of screwed up New York City for a couple of days, and people were, scrounging for food and stuff like that. I know Mike has like probably 15 years of food in his bunker, but the average American has a week or something like that. So,
5 days.
Or look at the gas shortage. A pipeline shut down for a couple of days. There wasn't actually a real shortage. Just gas stations they couldn't plan for a run on gas, and people were going crazy. So
the shortage was for the run. People were filling up all their tanks,
their
farm tanks,
trash bags,
plastic bags,
that's styrofoam coolers.
Well, the toilet paper shortage at the beginning of this last year, everybody bought a couple of extra rolls, and then a handful of people cleared out the store, and all of a sudden you've got a week's backlog.
Well, so there, I got an interesting argument with a guy about this, but apparently there was an actual shortage of household toilet paper rolls. They had tons of the big industrial ones.
Yes.
They just had to retool the factories.
Because people weren't going to work.
Yeah. So you could have bought toilet paper in giant rolls, but no one wanted to. So
we had to deliver every 6 months in a crate, all the paper, sanitary supplies, and everything else. So we had just taken a delivery and didn't need any until like August.
Well, supply chain, that's a great place where your AI could attack, because especially if they get, smart cars, literally smart cars, trucks, they've talked about doing that with the 18-wheelers. If your infrastructure is even partially dependent on computers to get all of the product out of the warehouses and on the road, if that breaks down, how do you quickly replace that? Can you quickly replace it?
Well, that tanker in the Suez, imagine if someone had deliberately done that, and one in the Panama Canal, and one in the Straits. any of them.
Straits of Malacca would be
In Malacca.
a good one. Just crash a couple ships there.
Or the Straits of Hormuz, cut the oil off. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what the Iranians threaten to do all the time. But
Yeah. So,
yeah,
in regard to future warfare, I mean, are we ever going to stop having wars?
No.
No.
not as long as we're human.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably Skynet's motto there. Well, we got to stop the wars. We got to wipe out humanity.
Yeah.
Well, that was iRobot. Both it
Yeah.
was more in the movie than the book, but that was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a
Protect
flawed
humans.
species.
People are the problem.
Well, they are. I mean, we all know that. But yeah, in one of my series, Invasion, the military created AIs to help fight off aliens, and there was a very brief war amongst the AIs to decide whether humans are worth saving or not. Unfortunately, our allied AI won, but they said, okay, the ones that lost will help for this war, but then we're leaving. You know, we're going to another planet. We're just going to get the hell out of here because it's not worth it. You know, so who knows what's going to happen? You know,
I would actually kind of argue that war is a necessity. Conflict is what drives innovation amongst us. We're typically pretty lazy as a society and don't want to take the expense of developing new technologies and those big, large technological leaps. And conflict typically drives that innovation and drives that desire to expand our boundaries and expand our knowledge. I think that incentive to be better and to defeat our enemies and rub their noses in it is part of what makes us human, but it's also part of what drives us to improve ourselves.
I got a question for you guys as authors. How do we deal with the future when stuff that we write, you know, might be out of date 5 years from now, right? I mean, if you look at the guys from the 60s and 70s and stuff they were writing, they were just trying to figure out the internet. You know, how do you project forward into the 30 years into the future? I read The War in 2020 by Ralph Peters. He wrote that 2 decades ago, maybe. And we're so far beyond what he wrote. It's not even funny, but when he wrote it, it was, oh my gosh, high tech stuff, right? How do we as writers deal with that?
I think
that's an ongoing issue. Larry Niven had in the late 60s had a bunch of stories set on the planets of the solar system, and he'd sell the story, and before it was published, a probe would get there, and the science of that planet would change, and the story was no longer workable. You just do the best you can. I mean, you write what you're going to write, and our future doesn't have to be the future. It is a future.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's the job of any of us. I mean, this is just my opinion. I don't think our job is to correctly predict. I know there are certain authors like Rob Sawyer who sell themselves as futurists and are really into the idea that we can predict. I personally think science fiction writers are lousy at predicting. Anything we write now in 20 years, certain parts of it are going to look really silly because they were so far off the mark. And other parts of it are going to look so far future that it might not ever come to pass. And you just have no idea which is going to be which.
Yeah, I did an afterword for Heinlein's Starman Jones, which is a phenomenal story. But he wrote this in the 50s, and to navigate this starship through hyperspace, they've got somebody doing the math on paper, and then somebody else thumbing through a book to translate it into binary so someone else can push the buttons on the computer. Yeah. By the late 60s, that was technologically savaged.
Well, look at the computer on the original Star Trek. It's this clunky thing that makes mechanical noises when it's thinking. It speaks
for seconds.
Exactly, for seconds at a time, and it speaks in a very computery monotone voice. I mean, back then that seemed like what it would be, and now we're so way beyond it. And nobody had any idea. Like with cell phones, same thing. We leapfrogged over some of that Star Trek stuff so quickly, and nobody had any idea.
The flip phone was inspired by the tricorder or whatever from Star Trek. They were like, oh, this is amazing. We should have something like that. So.
And the smartphone is a tricorder. Yeah. On processing speed, I watched an idiot with a truck trying to strap a tree while sawing it to pull it in a certain direction. And the truck gets dragged halfway across the landscape. And I'm thinking to myself, if only there was some very quick way. Oh, wait. So I typed into Google, how much does a tree weigh? And in 0.3 of a second, which is slow, University of Arkansas, Department of Forestry, species of tree, diameter, usable wood weight, 7,000 pounds. Yeah, that fast. And of course, this idiot hadn't done it. But yeah, that's with the human interface. The machine itself has the answer before you even ask it. And this is something that sci-fi had, even through the 70s, didn't catch up was going to be a thing.
Yeah, well, how many stories now do I still read tons of science fiction stories published now that don't have the equivalent of cell phones in them or radios, where they go down to a planet and they just can't talk. Or you look at Stargate SG-1, which is 20 years ago now, I guess. And there's a ton of times where they don't have a radio set because it's too heavy to carry. And even then they had backpack radios. I mean, it's not like it was sci-fi.
They could justify it based on what they could fit through the Stargate. They usually had a probe.
Yeah.
They had a droid, which, Star Trek never did. They had double polyester and a couple of phasers, and then in the Next Generation they had a couple of
They had Data, who was non-disposable because he was a unique robot.
And all they had to do was put him into the transporter buffer times 1,000, energize, and get one every ship in the fleet. Yep.
Okay, guys, you got about 2 minutes, right?
All right. So we drifted a bit at the end, but productive, and it's interesting to see where things are going. So let's wrap this up. Everybody give your last thoughts in turn. Go ahead. Start with Holmes.
Well, I think what it's going to come down to, as always, the future of warfare is going to be based on the human element. You can get so complex that you can't get Private Snuffy to pull the trigger anymore. And, it's still going to be the age-old, how do you lead people to get them to do what needs to be done in war?
Valid. Cal?
I think it's going to be driven by wherever someone sees an advantage. So if it's more advantageous to take your enemy out by soft power versus hard power, they'll go that route. If overwhelming force is more successful, they'll utilize that.
Brad?
Yeah, I think the one I would dwell on, just me personally, is social media and algorithms and manipulation. Maybe that is where the warfare lies, is in that Cold War aspect. You never have to fire a shot, but you win anyway because your AI controls what the other team's kids see and hear and what they believe.
Yeah, we never discussed the technological cost of development between, say, World War II aircraft and aircraft now. We have much smaller fleets to engage, and ultimately, physical warfare is expensive, messy, and not as effective as economic and cultural warfare. As we've all said, and what Brad was pointing out, that's more and more what warfare is going to be turning towards, I think. We've all got books out. Please buy our books. Bane's website, Amazon, our author websites. Give us your business. Let us beat the culture war.